Welcome to the CSBS podcast, the podcast series of the Center for Social and Behavioral Science at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. The purpose of the podcast is to showcase our researchers, give voice to our community, and if we can, have some fun along the way. We are researchers, practitioners, and all-around social and behavioral science nerds. We're glad you're here for the journey.
The following is a conversation with Dr. Sanjay Patel, a professor of electrical and computer engineering and a founder of several startup companies. In this episode, we discuss entrepreneurship and the challenges that come with trying to bridge the gap between research and marketable products with real-world impact. In this episode, Sanjay tells the story of how he and his fellow colleagues at the university founded Personify, a company specializing in artificial visual background technology. Additionally, this episode dives into how digital innovations, such as the university's Rockwire platform, on which the Safer Illinois app was created, must address a new wave of concerns regarding data privacy, security, and information sharing. Our conversation dissects if these digital platforms we use respect ethical boundaries regarding privacy. So Sanjay Patel, thank you so much for joining me today. Really excited to learn more about your experience with computer scientists, your interests, and talk about the Rockwire project.
Thanks, Pete. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here, and I'm very curious about the way this conversation will go. I have no expectations at the moment.
It's usually the way we like to do it, and I'm actually really interested in understanding your past background and history with computer science. I think everyone has those kinds of moments where, they start to realize that this is what's going to be, the thing that they're going to pursue later down the line. It just kind of garners their interest. What got you interested in computer science and the particular area that you're in now?
Maybe Pete, I would say I don't know what area I'm in. For me, it feels like I get continually distracted by shiny objects. And, the world of computing, I think we can all appreciate, is rife of shiny objects. So it feels to me like my career, since I, decided to become a computer scientist, I've just gone from one thing to another over the years. But I got my career started, as an academic here at the university, primarily working on chip design, which, a fairly esoteric, very deeply technical domain. And I spent a lot of my early career, academically at least, building chips, architecting chips, which was incredibly fascinating to me at the time. And then I proceeded to get distracted. And then from then on, it's been one thing after another.
So it sounds like chips were your first love there, though.
Chips were my first love. They got me into essentially an academic career where I was pretty successful. And then from there, I don't know, we can talk about the various distractions, which I think we will, but that's what it's been for me.
Yeah, actually, I would love to hear about these various distractions. I feel like everyone kind of goes through some level of distraction, but let's talk about the various shiny objects that you've been running towards. Can you tell us some?
Yeah, in fact, I early part of my academic career, I helped a few friends start a company that was loosely associated with my research, again, in chip design. So I actually ended up taking a leave from the university at the time to join their company and help them get started. And that sort of opened up a realm for me that was less focused on academic research and more focused on translation, like actually taking technology that, say, researchers would develop at universities and bringing them into the commercial world by really, embodying the research, building a prototype, and eventually building a product. So this, particular company that my friends had started was in the chip business for doing physics simulations. That company eventually got bought by a company called NVIDIA, which is a big company now in the chip space.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Yeah, anybody who's done work in AI or cryptocurrency has probably heard about them, or graphics for that matter, has heard about them. But they're a big company. Our company got acquired by them, and that really started a thread for me around technology commercialization. So I came back to the university at that point and proceeded to start a company, a new one, in an area I knew nothing about, computer vision. Again, that was the shiny object for me at the time. So I ended up creating a company with a few colleagues here at the university that focused on what ultimately became something that everyone knows about at this point. So if you go to a Zoom call and you decide to change your background, that virtual background technology is what we created at Personify before it became popularized by Zoom. So Personify did that amongst a few other things. We were very innovative in the whole video realm. Again, bringing this deep technology, this AI technology, artificial intelligence technology, into the video conferencing realm at the time. So that company, I ran it for about 10 years and eventually ended up selling it. Actually, a few years before the COVID epidemic, which essentially turned the whole world onto Zoom and virtual backgrounds. But that got its start at Personify, I'm happy to say.
So it's always so fascinating to me when I learn about academics like yourself who manage to take on this entrepreneurial lens into their work. And is that like a common thing for folks who are in electrical engineering, computer science, engineering in general? Obviously, I'm more of a social scientist, so we don't really get that entrepreneurial spirit, I think, as often, but I'm also not sure about that.
Well, I think one key difference is that, the electrical engineering, computer science realm are just so topically relevant for the commercial world. The commercial world is so hungry for the technologies that many people are creating. So there's just a natural, let's call it closeness between the stuff that, my engineering colleagues work on and what draws, venture capital and startup companies to form around those ideas. But that said, I think, academics, I think it's rare. I would consider it rare to find an academic who is really, who can succeed in the entrepreneurial world, because the worlds are very different, even in the engineering domains.
Right.
Because research requires a dedication, a commitment that's different, say, than what you need to do in order to bring something to the market. Right.
And so, what would you say have been, as someone who's been unusual, I guess, then, what have been some of your biggest learning points and successes in kind of navigating both the academic and the industrial institutions?
Yeah. I mean, they're very different worlds, even though they share, let's call it a technology backbone. It's a different type of people, a different type of skill, a different attention to detail. But again, linked by that common technology backbone. So I think if you're going to embrace the world of the entrepreneur, you sort of have to be ready for anything and just be up for it and have the energy. I'll give you a very concrete example. raising money to fund a company, which you have to do in order, to create a technology venture, at least, versus raising money for a grant. The processes are very different. The writing a grant, anyone who's in academia has done it. It's a process. There's a review. It's very equitable and fair, I would say, for the most part. Whereas the magic for raising money from an investor, there's a little more salesmanship involved, and a promise for the future, which I think some of that tends to get muted, or maybe say differently presented in the way we write grants. So it's a different mindset. It feels very different to me, at least.
Did you have any notable growing pains in trying to hone that business acumen coming from an academic background?
That's a good question. I'll say it a little humbly. I ran Personify for about 10 years. And for me, it was a 10-year apprenticeship in becoming an entrepreneur. So it was 10 years of mistakes that ultimately I felt like, wow, boy, I really failed at that. I want to do it again because I know how to do it right. Or at least I know some mistakes not to make this time around. Yes.
And what's like an example of a typical mistake, or one that was a central one that you learned from?
Oh boy, let's see. Let me think about one that's, I would say, notable. It's maybe this one. I feel like I wish I had absorbed longer or earlier, but sort of being customer centric, knowing who your customer is, and it matters. And there's a lot of, as a technologist, we tend to think that the technology itself is all that you need. Hey, look, I can change the background on my Zoom call. Look at how cool I am that I've created the technology to do that. But in order for that to mean anything to the customer, you really need to adopt the customer's perspective, because they don't really care about the technology, but they care about the solution, the problem you're solving for them, and how easy it is for them to use that solution. So there's a lot of detail there, how you present the solution, how you market the solution, that I thought would have been easy to learn, but it's actually very hard.
Were there any like particular moments where you fully appreciated how hard it was?
Well, designing a product, taking a simple thing like changing your background. That was the thing that we developed at Personify initially, anyways. Well, how do you put that into a product that anyone would care about at the time? Now, this was, about 8 years ago, and people were not doing Zoom calls 8 years ago. In fact, Zoom was just barely a company at that time. In fact, I knew Zoom from the very beginning because, we were interacting in the same spaces, so we knew of them and they knew of us. So how do you take this, technology that the world isn't ready for and create a product around it that people would want to use, and then figuring out who would want to use it, and so building that product where there's a user interface and a way for people to get updates and deployment. Do you put it on a laptop? Do you put it on a mobile phone? Do you, all those decisions were very tricky. and then motivating a team to actually build that product and iterate on that product were also essential.
And so who was the customer at first? Or were you not sure about the customer?
We didn't know. We had no idea. But we ended up landing a very big corporate customer that decided, hey, this particular tool, let's call it a tool that Personify had developed, was instrumental for the way they did sales. Because they would often run their sales meetings, with potential customers online through a product at the time called WebEx, which was a precursor to Zoom. And so their entire team ended up using Personify's product to make better virtual sales presentations. Basically what they were doing is putting the PowerPoint that they were sharing as their background. And they found that to be really effective for whatever they were trying to accomplish. So luckily they found us, and that one initial success took us to get more and more commercial successes from there onward.
Got it. And so now, one of the shiny objects that I understand has caught your attention is this little thing called Rockwire. Can you tell us what it is and how did you get started with it?
Yeah, Rockwire, I think, has an incredible potential. The Rockwire project actually started back in 2018. I think that's when it started. It was before I got involved with it, because of an initiative started by the provost and a fellow named John Paul and Bill Sullivan, both of them are professors. John Paul is a clinical professor in the College of Engineering, and Bill Sullivan, a professor of landscape architecture, who's been with the university some 30 years or so. The idea of Rockwire was really at the time the initial point to kind of modernize the way the university IT infrastructure is organized so that we can be more nimble about creating digital experiences and tools for the community, the campus community. And to understand why this is important, I think requires us to really take a look at the way the university IT information technology infrastructure kind of evolves. It's large. We've got about 50,000 people that are part of the university. Some of them are employees, faculty, staff, and some of them are temporary visitors, our students, or alums that come.
Right.
So the needs of the university are very, very diverse from an information perspective. So the systems the university had created over time were very, very disparate and isolated and siloed. And by the way, the same is true at every university. It's not just University of Illinois, really. And probably true at cities and communities and, where there is a civic information infrastructure. Anyways, these are aging technology infrastructures where it's really hard to modernize them and very expensive. So the idea of Rockwire was to essentially build a bridge that connects the old to the new in a very cost-effective way so that organizations like the university can create modern, contemporary digital tools, like let's say an app for students or an app, say, to manage COVID in a way that can be done very nimbly and rapidly and at very low cost.
And so when you think about building these technologies, you mean like things like apps?
Apps are one. Yeah, absolutely. It's very expensive to develop an app. And if your infrastructure, has pieces that are 20, 30, 40 years old, which is not uncommon at universities and cities, then it's even more expensive because you have to take that data that's stored in an old system in some corner of the campus and pull the data out in a way that, that can be done effectively, convert that data into a form that the app wants to use, and then present it in a way that the user feels is a modern way of presenting that. Let's make that concrete. Let's say it's, like the employee record for an employee app. We don't have one of those at the university, but let's say we did. So, employees at the university can easily check their appointments, their various information that may be relevant, right? To pull all that together requires aggregating data from these old data stores in a way that's responsive to the user, to the mobile app. To do that would take time, effort, and integration to these legacy systems. That's what Rockwire does, is just to make that very easy and very modern.
Got it. And just in case, asking our audience to nerd out over academic infrastructure technology, and what are the applications you see for Rockwire in more of like a city, like a non-university city?
Yeah, absolutely. So, coming back to it, right? The idea here is the Rockwire platform is open source, so that all these, pieces, these connectors, as we call them, that connect the old systems to these new apps and new digital experiences that a city or a campus might want to build. So that's what Rockwire is, just a collection of these connectors and building blocks, as we call them. So now a city that, let's say, wanted to create some kind of digital tool, let's say so that people can more easily pay their parking fees. I don't know, I'm just trying to pull something out, right?
Right.
That app, you sort of adopt the Rockwire infrastructure, you kind of weave it in to your legacy systems, like maybe your GIS database that shows you where all the parking meters are, and then your credit card payment scheme, and this and that, and now you can build an app through the Rockwire interface with UI elements without having to spend a lot of time and effort and money to make that happen.
Interesting. And the way I understand it too is that Rockwire, in doing all of this, has had a particular focus on privacy. And I want to separate and unpack that, because it seems to me like everyone talks about privacy. Like everyone is talking about how, your data needs to be secure. And, like when you download a new app or something, you maybe see a screen that says, blah, 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 we do this, and this is our privacy statement. And sometimes they'll simplify it for you and they'll say, here's what our privacy statement means for you. But my understanding is that, again, you guys have had a real focus on privacy. Can you tell me like what makes Rockwire's focus on privacy unique?
That's a great question, Pete. Right, we have to come back to the Rockwire audience, campuses, communities, cities, where there are public users. A student or a visitor to campus is not an employee. They're voluntarily using the platform. Their data doesn't need to be shared in a way that doesn't deliver them value, directly. So we have to be, let's call it stewards of their data and put their interests first above all others. So, and that's, I think, the difference in perspective. Over, say, a platform like a social media platform, where, they're using the social media platform voluntarily, but the idea is that they're sharing, knowing that the data is being used by the social media company to further its own benefits, right? And it's just the exchange. Here, the data that, let's say, the user of the parking meter app, their data needs to be completely private and not made visible to the city or the municipality that's ultimately running the app.
Right.
So we wove in that privacy perspective from the very beginning.
Right.
I like to use the phrase privacy native for Rockwire.
Huh. Interesting. And I also like that the app that we're imagining for this scenario is a parking fee and not a parking fine app. I thought that was a nice touch. I'd be less inclined to use that parking fine app. Darn it. These technologies. But I wanted to ask, so it seems like there's a particular focus on that. How does Rockwire handle that? Like, what does it mean to be privacy native, for example?
Well, yeah. So initially, and in fact, even I would say primarily, we try to keep a user's data on their device.
You try to keep a user's data on the device. Okay, now what does that mean?
On their device. So let's take our COVID app, for example. So on the Rockwire platform, a number of different COVID testing and management apps have been deployed, including one here at the university, Safer Illinois, but also at various other institutions like University of Wisconsin, University of Nebraska. For these COVID management apps, let's say you get tested and there is a result. You get positive, negative as to whether or not you have COVID.
Right.
So that determination comes from a lab and then ends up getting encrypted and then stored on your device. So no one else has seen that result, and that result is not stored anywhere except once it's off the lab system on your device.
Okay.
So now any decisions that have to be made are only made with your device involved. So for example, entryway into a university building, which here at the University of Illinois, there was a color code on your status card. The determination of that color code and all the logic that goes into determining whether your code should be let me in the building or no, you can't go in the building, was all done on your device. It never went into the cloud. Your test status was never decrypted anywhere except for on your device. That's an example.
Got it. And it strikes me as I, try to wrap my head around some of these technological issues, as I'm sure many of our audience members may as well, that this could boil down to, marketing. Like, you might have the best privacy-centric tech in town, but if you can't convince people of it and you can't make it make sense to people, so they say, oh, that's the Rockwire thing, or that's the app that's built with this technology, then it might not necessarily garner the kinds of trust that you would hope that would drive adoption. I'm kind of curious, how do you bridge the gap between, how do you help people understand?
That's a very loaded question. I don't know. I don't know if I have the answer to this, right? Coming back to my previous point about understanding the customer. right?
Right.
Anything you want to make successful, I think you really need to take the perspective of the customer or the user in this case. I think privacy means different things to different people. Maybe I'll ask you, what does privacy mean, right, to you?
Yeah, good question. I think of privacy as like in the context of an app or a website or something where I'm, clicking the user agreement where I'm, signing away my soul. I think, okay, I hope this doesn't come back to bite me in the ass in some way, either because some sensitive information of mine gets stolen and now someone can, do something malicious to like my, reputation or my, my credit score, or they can steal my money. But then also, I guess there's the personal aspect of it that is, I hope that someone doesn't know something about me that I think is, too sensitive or too personal that I wouldn't want someone to know about me. I guess those are the kinds of ways I think about privacy.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think we're always concerned about what are we leaking with these apps that could, eventually bite us in the ass. I tend to be a little private myself.
Mm-hmm.
So whenever my wife or my kids take pictures, and they're put on Facebook, I don't stop them, but I often worry, well, what kind of arc will this particular image take? And who will see it, and how will it get resurrected in some way down into the future, right? I mean, I think that's a real issue, right? As images get shared on these networks, and they're auto tagged, and people know who you are, right from the image.
Right.
But then, what really matters to people? I don't know. I think there's a wide spectrum of things here from a privacy perspective.
Do you think that the world would be better if we could just get over that? Like our kind of, innate apprehension about other people, like knowing stuff about us or seeing us in certain lights, thinking about like the arc that your picture might take online. Do you think that the world would be better if we could all just get over that? I sometimes think about that, like not in a serious way, but then maybe in like, okay, but also maybe like if I could just be a little bit more comfortable publicly, I wouldn't have to worry so much about like these privacy related issues. There's still the data security thing, right? But like, my financial information and my logins, I mean, that's one thing, but then the personal side of it, I sometimes wonder about.
Yeah, no, it's a great, like, let's think about different societies, right? I'm familiar with the society that my parents grew up in, which I did not, back in India, where I think things were shared a lot more openly about the way anyone led their life than in this country. So I don't know. Here we have I have a personal apprehension towards sharing too much.
Right.
I don't know if I'd feel comfortable in a place where everything was shared about me.
Right. And I don't mean like maybe not everything, but I mean, I think that it's, you can also strive to feel more comfortable or feel more secure. I think this is something that probably a lot of people think about. It's something that I think about, like, how do I feel, more comfortable putting myself out there, letting more information about myself be known. But yeah, I kind of wonder about that side of it.
But isn't the beauty that you can, you can do whichever one you want?
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But I was going to ask you, because you have a project involving Rockwire, where again, given all these privacy measures that we're putting into the project, and again keeping it civic oriented, I think it's a powerful tool for us to build the future, smart cities, smarter communities. And the project you and I have together is around helping communities address community violence.
Right.
And I think I love this project in the sense that it feels real and it feels potentially impactful. But I also feel at moments like there's no piece of technology that can help address this particular thing, right?
Right. Yeah. So I think I have a lot of feelings about the project as well. A lot of it is excitement because I think it is a really cool project. And so obviously we've partnered with the city of Champaign. We're using that partnership to try to work with them and all of the different service providers and community members who are in Champaign-Urbana to create these integrated and digital tools that can help reduce community violence. Now, we don't know what that looks like quite yet, but I see that the technological utility is kind of augmenting what people are already doing. So we don't want to reinvent the wheel and create some totally new, service. You want to try to leverage the service providers that are already out there doing work. You want to work with the city rather than create something that's totally new alongside them. And so I see it more as, it's not going to help solve the problem, but what it will do is change or supercharge the kind of efforts that are potentially being done right now. I'm not saying that that's inevitable, but that's like the hope, I think, right? The technological side is an interesting sell, I think, for the project. And I see the utility of what Rockwire is there, and you can correct me if you feel something different. That there are lots of different service providers, and the city is one of them. But we look at organizations in town that are working in the violence reduction space. And a lot of them are, places that maybe aren't even directly related, like Champaign Parks District, right, is in a lot of ways the violence reduction space. Like they're giving people a place to enjoy their time, to build, social connections with others, to develop new hobbies and new interests. And in a lot of ways, you could argue that is violence reducing. But a lot of these organizations and service providers, they collect data, and it is siloed a lot in the way like you were describing it is siloed on a university campus. Like a lot of the technology that they're using to collect that data is maybe out of date. It's different for every service provider. So you have to, try to make, I think of it like different kinds of USB plugs that don't necessarily connect with each other, right? And you have a kind of tangled mess. And there's also the privacy component to it as well, because maybe you're going to ask, when you're dealing with, violence and maybe even gun violence in particular, you might be asking people questions, or you might be interfacing with data that people are extremely concerned about in terms of privacy. So you need to have a way that can, technologically augment the work that's being done here in Champaign, and you need to do it in a way that is highly concerned with preserving people's privacy, and just as importantly, I think, building and maintaining their trust in the technology that you have. And there's lots of different facets of that trust. There's, do I think that the, technology itself is helpful? Do I think that, it's got my best interest in mind? Those are almost completely separate concerns of trust. Compared to, is it going to really preserve my privacy? Like, is my data going to be leaked? And we're not really sure exactly what the intervention point is. We're still kind of doing the preliminary research and thinking about the opportunity areas, but I see it as being potentially very useful in connecting disparate data streams, allowing service providers that have been working, basically, I see it as allowing them to collaborate maybe better because of the connectivity that Rockwire allows. But that's my 2 cents.
Got it. So right now, do you think the most beneficial touch point is something for the service providers that are working at the ground level to address the particular community's needs?
Right.
Yeah. In the form of communication, or do we not know yet? Or what do you think the opportunities there are?
Oh, wow. It's a huge question. The Siebel Center, who we're partnered with, the Siebel Center for Design here on campus, they've been helping out with a lot of the process as we go through what are essentially a lot of qualitative interviews, just kind of conversations that we've been having with service providers and individuals in the community to understand just what their experiences have been and what their needs are. They would caution, you shouldn't guess at this point because you have no idea. And, trying to make a guess as to what the particular thing is you're going to build will, kind of bias you down the line. But we have a few opportunity areas, I'll say generally, that we're kind of thinking about right now. One area does have a lot to do with that connectivity. So you'd be able to create better wraparound services for individuals who have been affected by or might be affected by community violence. And what I mean by wraparound services is that you kind of provide that individual or that family everything that they need to get over that situation. So there's the organization that helps maybe provide people with housing who have been affected, because they're not feeling safe where they're at right now and they need to relocate temporarily. There's the organization that maybe helps if they if they struggle with food insecurity. Then there's the organization that can help connect them to food and access to meals. There are organizations that will help with education. And so you look at like an issue that's as systemically created and deeply entrenched in what's going on in people's lives as violence. And you really need to have a lot of different things in place to elevate those individuals who have been affected out of that situation, and to help make sure that the cycles kind of come to an end. And that can't be done with, I think no one would argue that can be done with any one thing, right? I think the more and more you read up into it, you realize that it's a tangled and complicated web. So a lot of the, I think really successful interventions have been, ones that focus on these wraparound services that really try to cradle, the individuals and handle all of their needs and kind of get them to a qualitatively different place than where they were before. Not just like moving, this little performance on one outcome, like, their well-being or, are they how many nights a week have they been homeless versus in stable housing? Like you're really kind of moving the individual through all of those things simultaneously. And it seems to me like if you can create an app that allows for these different organizations to share data, to understand each other's outcomes, to kind of get them rowing all in the same direction, and kind of focused on that shared outcome, then you have a lot of potential, because the need for that kind of data and infrastructure is really, really high in the community. So that's one opportunity area that really comes to mind, in part because of the conversations we've had so far about what Rockwire is and what it can do. I think another...
That brings up a point.
Yeah, go ahead.
Now having been involved with, I would say, 5 or 6 different Rockwire use cases, you bring up something really that feels to me like an emerging theme, this wraparound service, which, if you look at it, it seems like, well, that's simple, really. But it's so essential, in the COVID world. Providing a wraparound service around, where you should get tested, when you should get tested, how frequently, and then if you become positive, what should you do as your next steps? Providing I'm not exactly sure if that's what you meant by wraparound service, but like a point of information that's very concrete and clear and definitive. It's just so hard to provide. And I think that simple thing that Rockwire can deliver adds so much value. I've seen it a number of times.
Right. I think that another area that could potentially be another area that Rockwire, the unique technology that it employs, could be developed and used is in the area of conflict mediation. So thinking about ways in which you could use the technology to build off of the service providers to, reach out when they feel like, they're in some kind of need, and to connect them to the service providers, the individuals. I mean, thinking about it as a way to kind of build social capital, right? Because we don't think that the solution is going to be, a technology. We think that what'll happen is the technology will help amplify the services that are already being rendered and help build the social capital that's really important, right? You're not going to swap out, the human bonding and the social ties for technology, but you can use the technology to facilitate more of those kinds of meaningful connections, be they in the context of conflict mediation. Hey, I have a beef, like I need to reach out to someone who can help me get through this, or just in terms of developing meaningful social connections that will help, engender a new sense of how people see themselves. I'm learning, I'm playing basketball. I'm a teammate. I am someone who is a rock climber. I like to do this with my time. Something to help connect people to those kinds of things where they feel like they belong, and where they really can identify with a sense of, who they are in a productive and a healthy way. But we've actually, unfortunately, run out of time already. Such a bummer. I feel like we could talk about this for so much longer, but any final thoughts, Sanjay? I know you must be a really, really busy guy, so I really appreciate you coming on and chatting with me today.
Well, Pete, thanks for being an adoptee of Rockwire. It's been really fun, working with you over the past few months to bring Rockwire into another realm. For addressing community violence. So thanks for that. And also thanks for, having me on the podcast.
Yeah, of course. Like I said, I could talk about this for a lot longer. So we might have to have you on for a round two if you don't mind being pestered.
I don't. In fact, we should do it right at the, once we have some concrete outcomes from our project together.
I think that would be a great update, actually. That's a great idea. Yeah. Okay. Well, you can't back away from it now. It's been recorded, so you can't ever back away from it. So thank you, Sanjay, again. Pleasure talking with you.
See you, Pete. Bye-bye. Bye.